Hello, people of the internet. I'm very tired right now. I don't know why I decided now was the time. Now is the time to do this wrap up. So we're doing it. This is a full wrap up. So in the future, I probably will be doing more lightning wrap ups like I did in February, but I only read 22 books this month. So that's enough. I can just do just a regular wrap up. I did actually read 23 books, by the way, but one of them, the reading vlog, hasn't come out yet. And telling you what I rated it would be like, spoiler? Okay, let's go. Let's go. So just like last month, I'm doing these in from least liked to most liked. Although some of the like ones that get the same ratings, I'm not quite sure of the exact order, but they're in 3 star, 3.5 star, 4 star, 4.5 star, 6 star, etc. I did not have any books lower than a 2 star this month. I mean, lower than a 3 star. So I at least liked everything that I read. So that's all we can ask for. And otherwise, I think I had a pretty excellent reading month. Let's start with my least liked book, which was still pretty good. And that's What Happened to Ruthie Ramirez by Claire Jimenez. So this is a book that, I mean, it's lit fic. Okay, so there's not a plot. It's just, it's vibes, it's exploration, it's lit fic, you know? So if you like lit fic, you might like this. But it's about a Puerto Rican American family who experienced the loss. There's three daughters in the family, and the middle daughter, Ruthie, goes missing one day. She never comes home from school. Somebody saw her walk to a bus stop, and nobody ever saw her again. Until now, the oldest daughter, Jessica, was watching a reality TV show, and she thinks that she has seen a grown-up Ruthie, same hair color, same birthmark, beauty mark on her lip. She is now convinced her sister, and then her mom gets involved, that this is Ruthie, although she's going by Ruby. It's very short. It's 240 pages. I enjoyed reading it, but I also think that it's not going to stick with me, and it didn't really do much for me in the moment, other than sort of giving me something to do. It wasn't the kind of story that I hoped it would be. It was a different kind of story, one that is going to appeal to a different kind of reader, if that makes sense. Like if it was telling more of a like mystery thriller aspect of this, then I probably would have liked it more, but it's definitely more on the lit fic end. So yeah, so that's 3 stars. My next 3-star read is an audiobook that I checked out from the library called Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. So this is a book, it's a dark romance, which I didn't know going in. I just thought it sounded interesting, but it's technically a dark romance. I guess I've read a lot of dark romance though, if you count fanfic. So I do read a lot of that. But anyway, so this is a book about 2 characters whose names I do not remember, so hence why, one of the reasons I've given it 3 stars, who are kidnapped by a serial killer and held in his basement for 3 weeks, and they fall in love. Now the 2 people who are in the basement, the main character, no, they're both main characters, but she technically has more POV than he does in the book. But anyway, whatever her name is, it's her sister's boyfriend / fiance that she's stuck in the basement with, and they experience trauma together and they fall in love. A little bit of spoilers here in the premise, but I mean, I've seen a lot of reviews spoil it, but if you don't want to know anything, the serial killer is called the Matchmaker, and his whole thing is he kidnaps couples who are not together, men and women, very heteronormative. The whole book was heteronormative. It's kind of gross, actually. And I remember there was some fat phobia and some implied homophobia as well in it. So that really stuck me the wrong way. So his whole thing was that he kidnaps them and then manipulates them so that they'll fall in love with each other, so that he can then kill one in front of the other and torture them. But that's like the first third of the book. The second third of the book is them coming to terms with what's happened. And it is a romance, so obviously we see where this is going. It was fine. I feel like Jennifer Hartman isn't my kind of writer. She didn't really explore any of the things that I would have liked to have seen explored. I would have liked to see them coming through their trauma and healing together. Instead, what we get is them being very messy and dramatic and having very angsty consequences and angsty conversations and lots of angsty sex, and then the healing is done off page. It just wasn't really what I wanted. Okay, next up, I'm not going to talk very much about this because if you just type in the name of this book, you can find a bunch of other people who are going to say very similar things to me about this book, and that's House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. So I did like this better than book 2. It wasn't boring. I was so uninterested in everything that was going on in book 2, and it was so long. So at least this had that going for it. And I read this book super fast, like 2 days. And it's enormous. It's 835 pages. I said this in my Goodreads review. She's not good at endings. I don't think Sarah J. Maas, Sarah Janet, you are not good at endings. Everything is wrapped up in a bow. Everything has the most predictable ending possible. Everybody's paired up. Everybody becomes superpowered. Everybody is now magically the leader of something. Like, it's just, like, there's different ways. There's different kinds of endings. Also, and honestly, this is a bigger crime in my book. The thing that I liked so much about House of Earth and Blood, which is the first book in the series, and actually I think it's my favorite book ever that she's written. The rest of them, I mean, Court of Mist and Fury is pretty good too, but I really liked A House of Earth and Blood because that book is about the main character experiencing trauma and then overcoming it. And it's like a very, I don't want to say it's a character study, but there's a certain intimacy you have in exploring Bryce and her trauma and learning what she learns and going on. And it's a mystery, and the stakes are lower, so they also feel more personal. And this is like universe-saving stakes. And the character, we just lose all connection to the characters. Like, and if you don't like the plot, then you're screwed because there's nothing more here. I don't think she knew what to do with Bryce and Hunt. This is fantasy romance, and their chemistry was very much there in book 1, and then after that it went. Well, I did have some things to say, but I'm going to stop talking now because I don't need. Anyway, 3 stars. I will continue to read her books, but I just really, my expectations are going to be down there instead of here, when previously they were maybe here, and then now they were here, and now they're here. So I just, trashy good time, I guess, is what we can expect from her. Even if she like nails it in one part of a series, she's not going to nail it at the end. Unless she changes as a writer magically sometime in the next several years. Now we're on to 4 stars. 4 stars. I didn't have any 3.5 stars. So the first one is a romance that I picked up on a whim after going to the Tucson Festival Books. I started reading it in the parking lot while I was picking up my groceries, and I just couldn't stop reading it. And that is How to Get the Girl by Anita Kelly. This is actually book 3 in a series, and I've read book 1, and I have not read book 2 yet. So that's dumb, but whatever. It doesn't really matter with romance. This is a sports romance. Main character is Julie, and she is the coach of a girls' high school basketball team. And Elle is a former she was in the WNBA, but she was most famous for her time as one of the Tennessee Vols, the Lady Vols, who are like, I mean, I don't know much about women's basketball at all, but I know the Vols are a big deal. Anyway, she mysteriously quit basketball 8 years before, and she hasn't been back on a court since, but her foster daughter, who is also her cousin's daughter, so I guess she's her cousin, is now living with her and is on the team. So she starts coming to practice, and then all of a sudden she gets roped into being the assistant coach, and they fall in love. And it was a good time. Not my favorite romance ever. I did like the experience. Julie is on the ace spectrum somewhere. She doesn't end up with a label by the end. She just knows that she's still trying to figure things out for herself, and I liked that. But also the experience of her not having an experience like everyone else and being unclassifiable when everybody else seems to have such an easy time figuring out who they are was very interesting to read about. And I also enjoyed Elle. She was just really cool. Also, good place jokes. Then another 4-star was Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. This is very much, if you liked There There, you will also like this book. They are a companion. They're set, honestly, it would be not a bad idea to just read There There and immediately go into this because there's similar characters, same situations. So the second half of this book is about the fallout from There There. So but you can read it without having read There There. I just think it's best if you read them together. I'm still sort of working out how I'm connecting everything thematically here, because this book isn't really about the same exact thing that There was about. This one is a lot about addiction specifically, whereas the other one was more about just identity in general as a Native person. It's the wandering stars, like different kinds of stars that are wandering pop up throughout the novel, and I'm still trying to figure out how they totally connect. And I think that's one reason why I didn't give it a 5, is that didn't just automatically happen. I'm having to sort of wrestle with it. Anyway, it was a good time. The audiobook was great, so I do recommend this. Next up is Last to Leave the Room by Caitlin Starling. I like this a lot better than the last book I read from her, which was The Death of Jane Lawrence, I think that's what it's called. That book just disappointed me because I wanted it to be something different. I really liked the first 50 pages of that book, and then the rest of it was just like, I don't want this kind of thing. But this one, I didn't have any expectations for it going in. It was so weird. It was a little bit of a mind fuck, and I don't want to say anything more than that. It doesn't get a 5 because this is a pretty short book. It's only 300 pages, but I did take several days to read it, and I did feel myself being called to other books while I was supposed to be reading this. I don't think I have much negative to say about it. It just wasn't as immediately compelling as some books, including Sarah J. Maas' book that I rated lower than this. So figure that one out. Next up was an ARC, and that's Where Sleeping Girls Lie. So I read the first like 70 pages of it hard copy before I decided, because I was so late on reading it, that it was publishing day, yay. And then I found it, was it the library or was it on Everand, Script, whatever. I found it somewhere to listen to, and I listened to the rest of it, and the audiobook was great. So if you're going to read this and you like audiobooks, do the audio. You know, the physical copy was good too. So this is a mystery book, YA, set at a boarding school in England, and the main character's name is Jade, and her father has recently died. Her mother committed suicide when she was younger, and she is on her own for the first time, and we open the story with her showing up at the school for the first time. Something else is going on that she's not telling us, but she's there at the school and she starts meeting people, and then weird things start happening. I won't say any more than that. If you liked Ace of Spades, similar quality characters, similar writing style, but also that book was more of a horror thriller with a much faster paced plot and lots of like twists and turns and reveals. This is more of a mystery. The pace is slower. She also spends a lot more time with the characters just talking to each other in daily life and getting to know each other outside of the mystery plot. So it is, just know that going in. And I did end up liking it a little bit less than Ace of Spades because that book was just so like, I have to know what's going to happen. And this book felt a little, like just a tiny bit like second booky. You feel the author like not being as sure of herself as she was the first time around. And she does note in the author's note that she had a really hard time with this book. It's still a good time. If you were looking forward to reading this, it's worth picking up. Before we get to my digital books, the last 4-star I finished this morning, and that's The Lily of Ludgate Hill by Mimi Matthews. This is the 3rd book in the Bells of London series that is set in Victorian England. These 4 friends who are sort of wallflowery are also equestrians, and they are known for their horse skills. So I don't know, this one I did not like as much as the first 2, which I fell into and was just utterly enchanted by. This one was just fine. And again, there's some mitigating circumstances. I think the author notes in the back of the book that her father died days before she started writing this. And I think that it shows that she didn't have as fun of a time writing this one. It was more serious. And that also, I mean, the subject matter definitely doesn't help with that. The main character's name is Anne. Her mother and her, they're still in their mourning blacks. If you don't know, like, the rules for mourning when people used to do this, generally for a father, it was 2 years was the max that you were supposed to do in mourning. And a year and a half, you were supposed to go into a sort of, I forget the name for it, a light mourning period where you wore grays and like lavenders. But it's 6.5 years later, 7 years later, and they're still in their full blacks, and they're seen as very eccentric. The author based it on Queen Victoria's behavior, although Prince Albert has just died 6 months before the start of this book. She has fun with history. One of the reasons I like Mimi Matthews. But anyway, so the book is just a little bit unpleasant to start with. The characters are, the 2 main characters, Anne and, what's his name? Wow, my brain. Guys, I just finished this morning. Hart. Felix Hartford, but he goes by Hart. The 2 main characters, they're just constantly butting heads. It's a second chance romance. They were engaged secretly 6.5 years before, and their engagement broke off when her father died for some reasons that the book gets into. She has been very antagonistic towards him ever since, and he's responded to it in his own strange little way. Anyway, it's just sort of antagonistic, like the first half of the book. When they finally make up, it became a much pleasanter reading experience. The other thing is that Anne was very difficult to sympathize with because what she does is out of context contemporarily. Like, we would not do the same things that we would do today. The author talks again in her afterword, in her author's notes, about how sometimes the death of a parent, when there's another parent who's also grieving, can cause a child to delay their own grieving or moving on. But that looks very different in Victorian times for a unmarried woman than it does nowadays for somebody who would have been Anne's age. So anyway, I don't know. I had a good time with it. I still really like Mimi Matthews, but this was a little bit of a blip for me. It's not my favorite. The first 2 books in the series I liked a lot better. Digital books. Oh, I lied. There wasn't a 3.5 star, but first let's finish up 4 stars. The Woman They Could Not Silence. I did this one by audiobook. It's read by the author, Kate Moore. This is about a woman in the 1860s who is committed to an insane asylum by her husband because basically she was getting to be too much trouble. She was thinking for herself and asking questions and embarrassing him. So he had her declared insane and locked up. And she spends the next 4 years of her life locked up in this asylum where she just not only does she experience stuff herself that degrades her humanity, but also she witnesses not just, people who are truly mentally ill being abused and not treated properly or whatever, but also other women like her who should not be, they're not insane, they're not mentally ill, they're just feminists, or they're depressed, or they're spinsters, or their husband decided that they wanted them out of the picture for whatever reason. Again, because this was legal. She spends the rest, when she finally does get out, she spends the rest of her life campaigning for women's rights and rights for the mentally ill and conditions in their treatment facilities. So she's basically a badass. She changed a bunch of laws, invented self-publishing. Well, she didn't really, but she was a self-published author. And I don't know. She's just a really cool lady. She was, I can't give it completely. I didn't give it 5 stars completely because it took a while to really hook me until she started really being mistreated in the asylum. I don't know, for whatever reason, it just didn't hook my emotions as much until then. And also, she's very naive in parts, very painfully naive. Even after experiencing some of the worst things that people can experience, she still manages to be naive about the way certain things are going to go down. There's this letter she writes. We talked about it for a very long time in my book club because we were all pretty much can't believe we just had to read that letter. I can't believe she sent that letter. I can't believe what happened to that letter. Good book. 4 stars. Wizard of Oz. My friend Paula made me buddy read The Wizard of Oz with her, and she advised that I should try the Anne Hathaway audiobook version, which was an excellent decision. She did a great job narrating it, and I had a really good time. It was very interesting. First of all, I hadn't seen The Wizard of Oz in 25 years. I watched it a couple weeks ago after this when it was fun revisiting my childhood like that, but it was funny to see the stuff they had changed or left out and what was better in the book and what was better in the movie. I'm not going to talk too much about that. It's only a 3.5 hour listen though, so if you have a spare Audible credit, it's the only place you can find it, unfortunately, so you can't get it on Libro or anything, or even the library, but it was a good time, so I recommend that. And the last audiobook, digital 4-star read that I had was The Center by Aisha, I always forget her middle name, Manazar Siddiqui. And this is a horror book, a literary horror, about a woman who is a translator, and her boyfriend mysteriously is fluent in 8 languages. And one day he tells her how he is fluent in those 8 languages, and it's because he takes these language immersion classes at this place called The Center that is extremely secretive and proprietary. Anyone who goes there is only allowed to tell one person their entire life about the center. So he's picked her. Her name is Anissa, as his one, even though they break up later and he's real salty about it, about having used his one on her. But she ends up going to this place to learn German so she can be basically a badass translator. And it's very mysterious when you get there, how the process works. It's even unclear to those who have gone through the process, but basically you can learn a language in 10 days and be completely fluent, native speaker fluent in a language in 10 days. So obviously something a little messed up is going on in the background, and when you do find out what it is horrifying and very intriguing. Now, I'm not quite sure this book rang perfectly for me. It did make me uncomfortable, in the middle, and I had to put it down for several days, which I do count against it, unfortunately. But mostly, there's just a lot that the author is working with, themes of identity, themes of, how language affects identity, who gets to speak a language? Is language culture? Like a bunch of questions that I'm not sure it ever even tries to answer or tie together thematically in a way that really felt super satisfying to me, but it was very interesting to read. And the thing about this book is that the voice, it's told in the first person by the main character, Anissa. The audiobook is fantastic, by the way. If you like audiobooks, the narrator is amazing. I loved her so much. I liked it, but I didn't love it. So it is one of those books that I might have to buy and reread, and like maybe a reread would bump it up to a 5, because I did find it very interesting, but at the same time, like something just felt a little missing from me. Maybe because it was a debut. I don't know. But I do recommend it. It was a good time, especially if you like slower, more unsettling horror that asks questions that make you uncomfortable, but that doesn't really have a lot of gore or killing or that kind of stuff. Like the darkness is elsewhere. Now, my 3.5 star that I missed. This was an ARC. It's called Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. I requested it, A, because of this cover, and B, I thought it was a woman. The writer was a woman. He's not. He's a man. And that just, it was a very male book, which I think is one of the reasons, like I feel like if a woman had written this, I would have given it 4.5 to 5 stars. But it was a very male POV. It was very funny. It was like a literary sort of funny though. So what this book is about, it's takes place during the Peloponnesian War. I didn't really know anything about the Peloponnesian War other than the name previous to reading this book. So if you're going to pick it up, I would advise taking a little trip to Wikipedia first, which I had to do after the first couple chapters. But basically, it takes place on Sicily, and there's 2 main characters, and they are the only 2 people who basically visit these Athenian prisoners that they are keeping in this quarry because they don't know what else to do with them. They're prisoners of war, and there's Athenians in the quarry, and they are not treated well. They are forced to mine. They're not fed very well. They're not given medical treatment. They're just the dregs. And these 2 men decide that they're gonna go down to the quarry, and they get the idea that they want the prisoners to help them put on a full production of the play Medea because one of the characters is obsessed with what's his face who wrote Medea. I can't remember the name right now. I'll put it right here. It's very important to the book, so obviously I'm not remembering it right now because it was very important. It was very darkly tongue-in-cheek funny. It was a satire. I mean, he's an Irish writer. These Greek and Sicilian characters were like speaking with Irish accents, which was weird. So it was all in all a very weird time. I enjoyed it, but I don't think it did much for me, like emotionally, beyond being entertaining and like thought-provoking a little bit. Still a great cover though. So yeah, 3.5 stars. Okay. Next up is our 4.5 star reads. Let's do the digital so I don't forget them again. Digital first is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. This is a thriller. I don't often have so much fun with thrillers. Like there's nothing like super special about this book. I just really liked it. It really just rang my bell. Told half in the first person perspective of the main character and half in podcast format of the man who has ruined her life. The first sentence is, a podcaster has ruined my life, so I'm buying a chicken, or something like that. And it's funny. So one of the reasons that I like the book so much is that it's really funny. Oh my God, it's already at 27 minutes and I still got all this books. So let's go real fast. It's just a really well done thriller. I didn't see the mystery, like the solution to the mystery coming. I really like the characters though, really. That's why I liked it so much. And the podcast element actually felt like a real podcast. Like so many of these podcasts that are in books feel too short. They feel not developed enough. They just don't have the authentic feel of an actual podcast. This one felt real to me. So anyway, that's great. If you like thrillers, if you like mysteries, it's also got mystery elements. It's not just a pure thriller. So let's move on to 4.5 and 5 stars. Oh wait, no, this is still these top 2. Sorry, these top 4 are still 4 stars. Oops. Okay, next up is House of Open Wounds by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I read the first book last month and I liked this one better. So the first book was like a mosaic novel about a city. This one is much more concentrated about this group of people who basically, like a reviewer on Goodreads described it as MASH, fantasy MASH. So if you know what MASH is, some of you youngins might not know, but I grew up with MASH on the TV. My parents would watch it every day. Well, not really my parents, my dad. It was a comedy set in doctor nurses' tents of the Vietnam War. Or was it the Korean War? I think it was Vietnam. Not positive. I never actually really watched MASH. I just heard the theme song. Left the room because I didn't like it. All that to say is they're fantasy medics, and they sit on the outskirts of the war that is happening, and they proceed, you know, along their day. So that it was a fascinating way to tell a story. And the thing I liked about this better was it just allowed for me to get to know the characters better than the first book did. And there are some characters who were in that first book that we get to know better here. Really like this one. Next up is The Forever Witness by Edward Humes. I pulled this one out of my TBR jar, so I put it on my TBR when I did that. And this is, I met the author last Tucson Festival of Books. He was a cool guy and he signed my book. This is a true crime book about a murder that happened in 1987. Yeah, 1987 in Washington. A Canadian couple, 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. No, he was 20, sorry. He was about to turn 21. Were murdered and missing for years and years. And their murder went unsolved for decades until DNA technology and some determined people combined to finally solve their case. The thing that I liked so much about this, the case itself was interesting if you like true crime, but I really don't think it could have held a book all on its own. So the thing that really makes this interesting is that he also traces the evolution of DNA technology, forensic, he calls it something at the end, forensic genetic genealogy, I think is what they call it. And like there's ethical issues with that, the laws that are being in place right now because people are, you know, the same thing that happens with new technology everywhere. People are like, whoa, this new thing, and then there's a boom, and then all of a sudden then the people have to react to it. But he traces that and how that allowed this case and others to finally be solved. And it was interesting. I liked the writing voice. It wasn't anything special, but I would read from him again. Next up is The Jasmine Thrown by Tasha Suri. Really glad I finally got around to this. I didn't like the characters so much, which is why, I mean, I did like them, but I didn't love them, which is why it's only getting 4 stars. What I really loved about this book was the world building. It just felt so fresh and unique, and I don't really want to talk about it, but it basically involves an empire, and one of the states in the empire at one point had some very powerful magical beings who were defeated, and one of the main characters was a child in the temple where these beings were worshipped, and she and her fellow children of the temple were developing these magical powers that hadn't been seen in generations back when these magical beings were defeated by the empire, and they were emerging again for the first time. And so they were slaughtered, and she and a couple of other characters survived this slaughter and now live in this empire. And the other main character is a princess. She's a sister of the emperor, and she's in disgrace because she refused to let him burn her for magic, for religion. So anyway, these two meet, and one becomes the servant of the other while she's imprisoned, and revolution blooms from there. And I just really enjoyed this, and I'm really interested to see where she's going with the story. Okay, next one up. This one really surprised me. It's been getting super mixed reviews. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people are like, what was this? 3 stars. And usually with those types of book, I'm like right in the middle with people, but I actually really enjoyed it. And that's Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. This did get some mismarketing, which that's not the author's fault. It's not a romance. It's not sapphic. There are some characters who have sapphic relationships in here where like they go on a date with each other, you know, or there's like hints that romance could develop in the future, but that's not what the book is about. This is a book about, it's like the author decided, I want to write a book about somebody who was born into a death cult, a fascist death cult, and radicalized from birth. And then what would it take, basically, is this whole book, to unradicalize this person, to deprogram them and make them into a semi-functional human being with a healthy perspective on the universe. So that's what this book explores, and it gets surprisingly sci-fi and timey-wimey and dark. And there were points in the book where I was like, something doesn't get fixed right now, I'm gonna be so mad, and I was like into it. There was a thing at the end that was really cringy, and I wish somebody would just delete it. Like, it can go away forever and fuck off and die. But the rest of the book I found really interesting. And yeah, the main character is unlikable, but that's the point. She's brainwashed unthinking adherent to a fascist death cult in space. And all that comes with that, you know, eugenics, homophobia, control, misogyny, just a whole bunch of bad stuff. But I feel like all of it was handled pretty with like nuance. And like I'd find myself questioning something, and then that would get answered later in the book. Like, oh yeah, the author thought of that too. So I just feel like she just knew what she was doing, and she knew what type of story she wanted to tell, and I thought she told it really well. So I'm really glad that I read this, and I will be keeping it. So there. Now we're on 4.5s. So I read Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola. I was hoping this would be a 5, but alas, I'm only giving it 4.5, and that's because I said this in my review, but it made me feel really old and out of touch. Because the characters, the writing here, first of all, is fantastic. The sense of place and the sense of setting and character that immediately just jumps off the page was fantastic in here. Like, this woman can write, but also, like, she did it so well that I felt like I shouldn't be here. You know what I mean? Like, middle-aged person, like, walking into a space full of 19, 18-year-olds and not knowing the language, not knowing the customs. It was kind of like going to a foreign country. I mean, it's set in England, but I've read so many books set in England, but never one that made me feel like this. British young people, yeah. Also, she's a member of a subculture. Black British students go to this white Ivy League, not Ivy League because they're in England, but fancy college, like an arts college, and it's called Whitewell. But they have, all the students of color, in particular the black students, have made like a society, and they call themselves Blackwell. And it's very insular because there's not that many of them. They're the minority on campus. It's just really well done. I haven't even started talking about the romance yet, but basically these two people are really cute together, and I really liked them, and I'm so happy they're together. But also they're young. So this is a book about 18, 19, 20-year-olds falling in love. So it's, if you're looking for mature romance, this is not it. It was really good though. It just made me feel so old. Like, I've never felt old while reading a book, not even like a freaking middle grade book. Like, when I'm reading those books, usually I'm like able to travel back in time and be my 12-year-old self again or whatever. And here I couldn't do that. I was like, I'm the outsider. And that's fine. Like, this book wasn't written for me, but it is a very good book, and I think you should read it. And you probably won't feel the same way that I did, but I can't talk about the book without talking about how old it made me feel. So there we go. Next up is a poetry collection that I read for the Read Harder Challenge this year. The prompt was to read an independently published queer collection of poetry, and I originally had another book that I can't remember the name of on my radar for this, but then I read Emily Austin's 2024 release, Interesting Facts About Space, and I happened upon her Goodreads and saw this book was about to be released, and I said, well, that is a no-brainer. Like, I want to read that book instead of the other book. And that's Gay Girl Prayers. As you'll see, there's a nun on here, and if you've been around this channel for long enough, you know that I have a thing for nuns. Not like a thing for nuns, but, you know, I'm fascinated by them. But there's no nuns in here, so don't, it's just a good cover, okay? But basically what this book is she takes, I mean, she grew up Catholic, and she's a lesbian. This is a book that reimagines scripture, liturgy, and prayers, which those are all different things for you non-religious people. Like, what if they were inclusive of gay people? And she literally rewrites them in points. Sometimes she just has poems riffing on the themes of religion, but there's literally parts where she like references Matthew 25:1 in verse, and she'll rewrite it. The one that I quoted in my review, I also starred the poems that I really liked. This one is Genesis 3:16. Her desire will be for whatever she's into. If she wants it to hurt, she'll ask. I just liked that. And then there's like poems that she repeats herself and then develops it like almost like a story across the collection. Where's the one that I used though? She rewrote the famous witch verse. She says, behold, God made them enchanting, strange and incombustible, like water. And I'm skipping some lines. Thou shalt relish a witch to live. Oh, here we go. So this is like the theme of the book. This one right here, I 5-starred it. So it's very short, and it's referencing Matthew 25:40. So I'm not super familiar with the actual Bible verses. I was never that kind of Catholic anyway, but Oh, I just lost it. But I definitely am not now after having been lapsed for so many years. But this is the poem. As you did it to the strangest of my sisters, you did it to me. And there's a whole theme in here, like, of kindness and acceptance and love and the celebration of sexuality and the celebration of difference. And it was really good. Like, some of the poems, like, flopped pretty hard, in my opinion, but some of them were great. And overall, I just really enjoyed myself while reading this. And I don't normally like poetry, so put this on your radar. Okay, next up is a book that I still haven't decided if I'm rounding up or downer yet because I haven't written my review, and that's The Woods All Black by Lee Mandello. This is my first book by this author. It's a novella. It's a historical horror about a trans man in the 1920s who is a member of the Frontier Nursing Service, which is when nurses came back from World War I, they signed up to work for the Frontier Nursing Service, and this service sent them out to rural locations that needed medical care, like vaccines and help with child care and birthing babies and all that kind of stuff that small towns maybe wouldn't have access to, or they don't have a doctor, or you know what I mean. Anyway, so he goes, his name is Leslie Bruin. He is still female presenting because it wasn't safe for him to transition socially, and the medical stuff had not, happened yet. But he's definitely presents himself differently, and people immediately can tell that he is not a socially conforming woman. And this town, which has been infested by a fire and brimstone preacher who is very much in control of the local social mores, does not receive him well. And there is another person in the town who Leslie immediately identifies as being queer of some sort, and he's pretty sure that he's also a trans man. Things escalate until they hit a boiling point, and bad things happen, and then it gets super weird and kind of sexy, but in a really weird way. This is literary monster porn horror kind of thing. All you monster romance girlies, if you want something a little bit more queer and a little bit more scary at the same time you're getting your jollies from that stuff, you might want to check this out. This also was just a great piece of historical fiction. I learned a lot about post-World War I America, rural America, and I always like a good takedown of the hypocrisies of religion. Yeah, it was just really good. I think this is one that I probably, when I reread it, because I will reread it, I will up it to 5 stars, but for now it's 4.5. I'll probably round down just to be safe. So yeah, 4.5 stars. Okay, now, so let's get to my last 2 books. These are both 5 stars, and we're gonna finish this before 50 minutes. First up, I read pretty early in the month, and that's The Hunter by Tana French. This is the sequel to The Searcher, which was her last book about a retired Chicago police detective. I can't remember exactly what kind of cop he was, but he's retired now, and he decided he wanted to move to small town Ireland for some peace. And he got something else instead in the last book. But in this one, they've settled into a sort of little family. He's got himself a surrogate, daughter in Trey, who's a 15-year-old person from town and who he met in the first book. And then his girlfriend, Lena. And then Trey's ne'er-do-well father comes to town and upsets everybody. It's like throwing a lit match into a haystack, that guy returning. And he brings with him this guy who has who wants to mine for gold in the town. And something is not right. And things slowly deteriorate from there. So this is a slow burn book. She is doing her own thing. She is not beholden to the conventions of mystery or suspense any longer. There's no detective format here that she's adhering to. In fact, the main character actively inhibits the investigation of the detective character that is in the book when the murder finally happens, which doesn't happen until a little bit over halfway. Point of the book is not who did it, although you do find out who did it. The point is Cal trying to maintain the safety and the peace and the little family he's found, and what will he have to do in order to do that. So very interesting. I'm here for whatever Tana French wants to write, and I'm not going to come into any of her books with any sort of expectations. So if you know going in that you like a slow burn character study, and you liked the characters from the first book, I mean, you could do a lot worse than pick up this second one, but I know this isn't going to be one that a lot of people are going to agree with me about. And then the last book, which I also finished this morning, which is so far my best book of the year, is The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. I was so worried about this book, you guys. I was so worried. So My Heart is a Chainsaw is like one of my favorite books of all time at this point. And I liked the second book. And I was just really hoping for a strong close that would not only reinforce what I loved about the first book, but would retroactively make the second book make more sense for me. And he did that. And then he did some other stuff I wasn't even expecting. And this was a fantastic close to Jade's story. This is a return, sort of, to form. In the first book, it was all Jade all the time. We're back there now, but she's now an adult. It's 8 years since the first book. She has conquered a lot of her demons. She is more reflective. She is more patient. She's more kind. She's in a much more emotionally stable place in her life. But these bad things keep happening to her, and why do they keep happening? There's some loose threads dangling from the previous 2 books. Those mostly get wrapped up here. I don't know, just the way he did this, particularly when you read the end of the book, when he has a really long author's note in here about his writing process and where he took inspiration from and how scared he was to write this book. And I find it's really interesting, actually. At one point he says he was really scared to start it because he didn't know if he was a horror author any longer. I don't know what that means, but it was interesting. He also said that he was scared to write this book and he wanted to make sure that it was perfect ending. So he wrote the book that's coming out this summer right before writing this one, because he wanted to get all his other ideas out of the way and start with like a blank slate for this book. I Was a Teenage Slasher, that one. He said he wrote that one in like 2 months, 3 months. And then 2 months. And then he only had 3 months on his 5-month deadline to finish this. And they bumped his deadline up for him so he could write it. Anyway, I'm talking about his writing process because I can't spoil you, because if you have not read the first book, you will not care and you will not understand what I'm talking about in this one. I will just say that if you like the first book, you will like this book, most likely. I know there's always outliers. The audiobook is great. There is a Stephen King cameo that was very poignant in the audiobook. Stephen Graham Jones also does the last little epilogue chapter. He reads it himself. And the Isabella Starr LeBlanc, who is an author that has read several of Stephen Graham Jones's books before, I really like her a lot. I really miss Cara G, but if anyone else was going to take over, then Isabella Starr LeBlanc, I trust her to do it. And she did a great job. The narrator who voiced the third-person POV for Jade in the second book was not my favorite. Isabella Starr LeBlanc was in that audiobook, but she played somebody else. And she did The Babysitter Lives, which is his audiobook only thing with Audible that I really hope gets printed soon. All that to say is I love this. And even if you're not a horror fan, like I'm not a huge horror fan, or at least I wasn't, this is ruining me, you might like this book. It's a character study of a community and a person, the most vulnerable person in that community, in a state of emergency, heightened by a metaphorical examination of slasher genre. I know it sounds weird. Very stream of consciousness, especially in the first book. It's very painful to be in Jade's head because she is in so much mental trauma and she's in trouble in that book. And it's like she finds a little measure of peace by the end, but it's very harrowing to be in her head. Much ironically, even though she goes through some even harder shit in this book, it's much easier to be in her head here. 5 stars. What I want to do now is I want to reread all 3 back to back, because I did the audio the first time, so I want to do the hard copy. I now have all 3 of them, and I want to mark my favorite parts and sort of do like a back-to-back reading so I can connect all the dots, because I think he like really wrapped some things up, and I really want to. Also, I spent about 3 hours the other day. This lovely person on, what's it called? The app with the movies. I can't remember the name right now. My brain. I'll put it here. I spent about 3 hours the other day transferring all of the movies referenced in these books to a Word document with checkboxes, and I'm calling it the Indian Lake horror movie challenge, and every movie on that list that I have not seen, I want to watch. And then maybe like once I get like halfway through it, I'll reread. I was going to try and get through the whole thing before I realized just how many movies are on that list, but it's hundreds. So there's no way I can watch hundreds of movies and wait however many years it's going to take me to watch all of those movies and their sequels or whatever to reread these. I started on it though. I watched Halloween, the 1978 original movie that like kicked off the slasher genre. I watched that while I was house sitting for Lindsay in her bed in her big alone house, and that was a mistake because the main character in that is also in a house alone. So that was freaky. That was my March, all my March readings except for one, which you'll hear about in a couple of days. And yeah, I think I had a great reading month, even though I didn't read that much because my depression brain decided to take over a little bit, and I was also really busy. I want to say hi to everybody, finish the video with me. So if you liked this video, please don't forget to drop me a like and subscribe if you wanna. If you've made it this far, please leave me for Jade. What can we leave for Jade? Bear. Leave me a bear. Leave me a bear emoji if you made it this far. And I will see you in the next one. Okay, love you, bye.